welcome to my interview. I don't
Okay.
know.
Yeah, sure.
I should have like an Autos podcast or some kind of name, I guess. But,
Well, you can always add an intro later.
Yeah, true. But I want to ask you 3 questions,
Okay.
mostly about dance and technology. And the first one, I want to ask you what is your relation to dance and technology? How did it start? How is it going? And what is dance tech for you? Or like it's really open-ended. Dance tech or like dance and technology.
Well, I guess I have a dance background, so I began dancing at university in the early 1980s, and then became interested in making work, composition, choreography, so how people, and also how others are making work. So I've always had an interest in the creative process, and made work for a while, and performed in other people's work, and consider that to be my kind of base from which I depart. Even though I don't dance any longer, but I feel that's kind of where I started. And then in the end, I became. I moved to Europe. I moved over to the UK in the early 1990s, and was teaching at the School for New Dance Development. And we decided to organize an event, a symposium looking at creative process. We called it 10 Minutes of Making, and we invited people like, the plan was to invite people like Meg Stewart and Alan Platel and other people who are working.
What year was it?
1996.
Okay.
Yep. And in beginning to plan that and organize and think about that event, I realized that there was somebody approached me, a woman named Bianca Van Dillen, who was working with Lifeforms at that time in Amsterdam. And for various reasons, other things popped up on the horizon that brought together dance and technology. I had not done that before in the past. So I had an early email, and then in the late 1980s, I used it to organize things. I used it to in the context of my work on the side, to support my artistic practice. I had to work on the side, so I taught myself to do some early scripting with WordPerfect. It's a whole story I won't go into. But in other words, I felt pretty comfortable with computers. I had my own PC and things like that. But I'd never put those two things together in an artistic context. Dance, there was dance. I did collaborations with video artists and other electronic artists. But thinking about the computer as a creative tool had not occurred to me at all, actually, until I began to look in that direction, and then realized that things had been going on for a while. But in the dance scene, since the early 90s, there had been various interactivity workshops and things in the States, so I became aware of that. STIM, the Studio for Electro-Instrumental Music, was in Amsterdam, and there was a guy there named, what was Tom's surname? Tom DeMeyer, who was programming something called Big Eye, which was using computer vision to track movement in space. And so the whole symposium sort of shifted to take a look at what's happening with computer technology, digital technology, and dance. It became the first European conference on dance and technology in Amsterdam in June 1996, 2 days. Heidi Gilpin was there talking about the Bill Forsyth improvisation technologies before it was ever a CD-ROM. Andrew Lepecki was there. We had Per Plateau and Amanda Stegel from Oslo, who were doing internet performances. We had Big Eye and Cher Dorff, and so we had all of the various, all of the things that are still like telematic performances, real-time interaction performances, training tools, creative tools like Lifeforms. It was all sort of there in 1996. So that was, I kind of stumbled into it, and that's when it began, sort of. And Mark Caniglia was around. He came to Amsterdam with Troika Ranch. That's pre-Isadora, his project. He and I became good friends and started the Dance Tech Net. It was Dance Tech Net mailing list, which Marlon then sort of kind of took over that
Oh, so there's a
community.
mailing list before.
Yeah, it was just your standard mailing list, and there are archives from 1996. It had been established by a guy named Scott Sutherland at Ohio State University. Ohio State University had quite a lot of computer graphics, and there were people very interested in dance computer graphics there in the early 1990s. And one of those dance and tech conferences, I think, happened there. There were 3 that happened before the international dance and tech conferences happened. And those sort of died out, and MoCo took over, movement
Wow.
and computing. So you had this kind of trajectory of stuff that was happening already, and sort of, so we organized this event. Mark and I started the Dance Tech Net. I think it was called Dance Tech Net. Art.net. Doesn't matter. It's still online. The Dance Technology Zone. That's what it was. It's still online. We thought we could sort of begin collecting and gathering writings and artists working on things. We had a list of names and little
So that's
bios.
the one that Marlon is organizing now, or is it something
No,
different?
no, that's really, I believe it's still online someplace. That was our attempt to kind of community organize in a way, which he's very good at. And he used basically he popped in when Web 2.0 was around, which set up an entirely different kind of platform for community building. But we were pre-Web 2.0.
Wow.
Yeah. And then we did, and then I got involved in various, I think things then shifted. I did a few projects, and then things shifted to, I got involved with lab-like things. Not quite, I guess like a little bit like the choreographic coding lab. But I frequently got involved in various sorts of labs where technology people would come together with dancers. I don't know, several. In different contexts where we would explore various topics. And there was a period of time in the early 2000s when the Monaco Dance Forum was organizing a guy named Philippe, oh goodness. Philippe, I haven't had any contact with him for ages. That's kind of embarrassing, and I apologize to him if he hears this, but he was instrumental in setting up opportunities for us to do research labs in the context of this quite high-profile Monaco Dance Forum thing. And we could use downstairs spaces at the Monaco Forum right on the Mediterranean Sea. And a lot of people came to those for a few years. We did three. I think we did three. We did three. 1, 2, 3. And then Johannes Bering and I organized the last one, a fourth one. And then that stopped in 2004 or something like that.
But there was also the idea of like putting dancers and programmers together, or is it?
Yeah, those also, there were those teams, like Bruno and Ruth, Bruno Martel and Ruth Gibson took part in some of those projects, and other people, Mark and Don, Don Stepiolo, Mark's partner at that time. So there was a smallish community, felt like a smallish community of people that I interacted with a lot, and but I wasn't a practitioner. I was more of an organizer and a researcher and a writer. And then we started a dance and media course, an MA course in Amsterdam. It became possible through some funding from the government to start a kind of MA level choreography program. And that was called Dance Unlimited. It was a shared program with Arnhem and Rotterdam. Like 3 different dance schools were meant to be coordinating things together. And that was an interesting transition because it felt as if things were shifting a little bit, and maybe for me personally. I was getting more involved in the motion bank type projects with people like Forsyth, Emil Greco, the companies that I began to work with, like Wayne's company, Wayne McGregor and others, and I became more interested in using technology to document dance. I became much less engaged in the artistic part, but more on
because
the.
Prior to that, it was more like a real-time interaction.
It was the range of things. I was kind of watching what was happening in the field, and I was interacting with people and organizing opportunities for people to do those kinds of things, like here. But my own interest sort of shifted towards thinking about documentation. And also learning environments like the synchronous objects or Bill Forsyth. So Bill Forsyth's improvisation technology, CD-ROM, was always this kind of benchmark
Right.
for how that might be done, and still is in a way because it's such a crystallization of ways in which you could augment, But on some level, it's very simple. It's just him speaking and demonstrating with a line drawn out on top, and it does a lot. So I think I've always been interested in how that kind of thing worked, but and that was a shift for me away from being more generally involved in a range of things to focusing much more on research into creative process and how it is that documentation, which was always then digital, so it was already digital video and that was a shift for me at that time.
And can I ask you, like,
Sure.
this MA program or the course?
The course
you
in
mentioned,
Amsterdam?
And that, what was the focus of that?
Well, that did shift focus. It shifted focus away from, weirdly enough, I think the best way of describing it is that fundamentally, it felt like a pigeonhole somehow to say a dance and media course, because one of the things that it felt like you had to work with dance and you had to work with technology somehow. In other words, you were constrained. It was a constraint which I think we generally felt, and my colleagues who were working thought that it wasn't the most interesting choreography course that we could be doing at that time, given how the field, I think we were, and I have always remained more focused on the dance field as a whole than, say, the technology field. So, in a sense, so kind of, my idea about what I was most interested in communicating with people about was about choreographic practice and dance practice and that kind of making sense of the world through movement. And sometimes the technological component wasn't necessary in that context. And I think, weirdly enough, maybe that's the best way of sort of trying to articulate why we sort of shifted away. We had some great people involved, really interesting people who were interested, but I think, and maybe a few of the people who were working on the project themselves felt less comfortable with technology. Hard to say. But it shifted focus to more of a choreographic, non-residential choreographic course, which was very successful. I left Amsterdam at that point, but it was running for several years, and it was a good model. So it was aimed at people who were experienced in the field and wanted to do an MA, and it had a practice research component to it, and so that went well. But I don't know if there were some dance tech courses that started up. Ohio OSU had one kind of for a while. Marlon was part of that course in a way, doing an MA there. But I think maybe in Singapore still. Anyway, it's not my. Whether or not there are programs where you can go and kind of study this. I think the whole phenomenon is more dispersed than that somehow. It involves different things. People interested in movement. That's why the CCL is so fascinating. So people like Charlotte comes. She did her. The interest people have they don't have to entangle themselves with either thing and stay entangled. They can dip in and kind of understand movement. There's understandings of movement that are much richer than I knew because it's exposing people to different things in different ways. And I think this resonates with the way the sort of loose field, whatever it is, has existed and currently kind of really exists. Lots of people doing different things. I mean, in some ways, anybody interested in movement, can say that they have an interest in dance. But in what direction do you take that?
Yeah, I really like that in the morning round. Like everyone has different idea of movement from what I'm hearing, and that's already like opening up for everyone. And I guess it's the same with technology. It's not just about using this technology, but there's always like a range of, like not just the tools, but the application. Because annotation is one way of doing it,
Yeah.
real-time interaction and so on. That is, if we just say dance and technology, that was in my question, but it can mean anything, right? It can, like, we can be just dancing, but and without technology, but
Yeah.
it can be in the creation process.
Yeah, I think it's. I think it. I think it's. I think it could be any mix of people bringing together things that they know, practices that they practice, and those can be very particular. I mean, in both fields. So the main thing is creating a space in where those particularities, those very, very kind of refined sensibilities can find some kind of encounter, find some sort of way of communicating and then stabilizing around ideas or things that you want to make together or intuitions you have, and build trust and see. And it doesn't, the sort of, I haven't really thought of the term dance and technology for a long time, even though, or I wouldn't say I sort of used that really way of framing things for quite some time, because I had a lot of the collaborations involved anthropologists or other, anybody who's looking at the thing has something interesting that they think they want to say about it, or the thing they discover about it, things that they want to do with it, if they're researchers or if they're considered as artists. So, but the digital, that's why I think David's PhD that he's written is really interesting, because he's really grasped a lot of the complexity in that space. You've got digital humanities over here, and you've got, especially these days with data-driven computation, and machine learning, large amount of those. That's a wide open, big bear that everybody's trying to figure out what the hell's going on there.
Yeah, that's also like one of the questions I wanted to ask you, but also like.
Yeah, just stop me, of course.
Yeah,
no,
I'm trying to like juggle everything, because like now we haven't even reached the moment that you started Motion Bank, but also I want to ask you, like, what is the future of, let's say, dance and technology? We just mentioned a little bit, and there's always like topic about AI and so on, but I don't know which can go first. I mean, chronologically, maybe we can just like move forward to how Motion Bank started.
Yeah.
And like where it's going. I'm really curious.
Well, it's funny. We should synchronize this with Florian's explanation of where Motion Bank started. But it partly started with meeting Florian and Amin Weber, who was the other person on the project, kind of core digital expertise and creative knowledge. Because they hadn't encountered, I think Florian he probably said this, he had seen Bill's CD-ROM, so he had an idea about what, and he thought, that we can do that. And then he read Deborah Hayes' My Body the Buddhist, and he went, whoa. So this is also dance making. So we had a wonderful meeting, I'll never forget it. Where I was extremely happy to have met them, because the other people who were being proposed for collaborating at the digital side didn't have the kind of curiosity and openness and creative chops and things that Florian and Amin had. But Motion Bank, I just happened to be. I think I'd been working with Wen McGregor and Emmy Greco and Peter Skolton, in a way, working for dance companies that were well established and were interested, for various reasons, in I think kind of reflecting on their own practice, or ways in which they were already transmitting their work. They were already doing they were very successful, relatively speaking, successful, and wanted to find ways to communicate the things that they were working on, the ideas that they were having, I think, outside of just making artwork somehow. It's probably a rather awkward way of putting it, but it was, and in those contexts, the digital technologies were always part of the collaboration for various reasons, to either to create a digital tool for Wayne, for example, that was meant to be kind of an independent autonomous agent. There was building the installation for MEO and Peter, double skin, double mind interactive installation with Chris Ziegler, got involved with that. Siobhan Davies, I was peripheral to that project, was building a digital archive. And Forsyth had kind of in the mix there, and through a woman named Rebecca Groves, who was at that time sort of responsible for his. She'd been a dramaturg with him, but she was responsible for. She took on kind of setting up a platform for education around his research and what he'd done, and contacted me. And to make a long story short, I believe it was something like he wanted to take the piece One Flat Thing Reproduced, which is the basis for the Synchronous Objects website, and felt that that would be a great piece to do something similar to improvisation technologies, literally use lines on top of video to help people see things that were going on. And in this case, he wanted to communicate the choreographic structure, whereas the other was about communicating, kind of more of the inner ideas and how they materialize through movement and imagistic work, to really giving viewers an opportunity to see how a piece of choreography is organized. That was the impetus. And I was interacting with people at Ohio State University and proposed them as a possible partner. And that's how Synchronous Objects began. And then Maria Palazzi and Nora Zuniga Shaw, they were the collaborators with Bill on that project. But Bill then, he wanted to kind of open it up, which is one of his real kind of, some of the most positive about Bill is that he was always, often very open to letting other people into the creative process, opening it up, trying to share things with others, and also create opportunities to have dialogues with other choreographers. So he thought, well, I'd love to build something larger, a library of resources, education resources around other makers' processes, like a Trisha Brown, or a Anna Teresa de Kiersmacher, or a Deborah Hay, or a Jonathan Burrows. And that was the impetus for the thing called Motion Bank. That wasn't my name. I have no idea where that name came from exactly, but it happens to emerge in some emails. I think maybe Rebecca, and then I spent quite a bit of time in Frankfurt off and on with talking to the organization, and the Synchronous Objects was being made, and I was kind of a middle person for that project. And then we just looked for funding for Motion Bank. I think he knew, I believe, and that Deborah Hay should be one of the choreographers. And importantly, it was partly conceived of as a project where the choreographer would be commissioned to make a work for this platform. So the commissioning, and that also took care of all the contractual obligations. So in other words, all the rights and everything, which funnily enough it's very hard to engage this material if you don't have the rights for it, especially with an ensemble or people who are really well known. So, and Bill had been through some of that, or he understood that, given the scope of his operation, that if we're going to collect data and visualize things, we need to commission choreographers. We can't just use some former piece they made or tapes they have. We need a whole, need to build a whole thing around that endeavor to do something with digital technology. So that was the main, he said, this is working well for these projects, Synchronous Objects, that's fantastic. Let's see what digital technologies could do for other choreographers, helping people see the invisible things in their work, so to speak. And that's how that started. And then the Bundeskulturstiftung, the Federal Cultural Foundation in Germany.
So that's like the first phase.
The first phase was funded by them, with money from different states, like Hessen, money from Hessen. I don't know if Dresden, maybe Dresden, maybe Palooka. Yeah, Palooka gave some support, Yeah, we get support from Beluga, so Dresden. I mean, that's the comment. The Dresden Frankfurt Dance Company, anyway, is the funding for Forsyth Company at the time was coming from those two states and those two cities, and yeah, the Fraunhofer Institute was involved and various people, and that's when we built the team, and we had a significant amount of money to go ahead and work directly with Deborah, and then Jonathan Burrows was another person. Thomas Howard came on board after B.B. Miller and Thomas Howard came on board. I think previously there was another choreographer. They were doesn't matter. They were those four choreographers were the ones we focused on in the first phase, and that was between 2010 and 2014. I was half-time employed to kind of manage the project. Florian was, I don't think he was full-time, but people were. We had various. We had a team that was sort of funded, put together, and that's how that started.
And you were already organizing this CCL format back then, and is it when was the first CCL?
In 2013. So at the final event, which was really a brainchild of Florian's, because I think I immediately resonated with the idea, or maybe it was already sort of pre-thought. I mean, Florian came from a creative coding background with processing. This was very clear. That was, on his cap, and he brought that perspective and that interest in seeing what we could do with the data, creatively using these kinds of creative coding tools. So I think in his very first opening talk at the opening event for Motion Bank in 2010, he said, "Everything's data." So we're imagining that what we'll do is collect as much data as possible and see what we can do with it, see what kind of patterns we can see in it, regularities, variances, disturbances, and that we'll try and line that up with what we're able to, access directly from the choreographers themselves and makers themselves. And so at the end, and I think throughout that time, Florian and Amin both learned a tremendous amount about dance making, things they'd never known before. So I think there was this sense that knowledge was being really shared between coders and dance makers. So the coders were not, Fraunhofer is more of a computing science sort of research organization, but that's why, again, it was miraculous to get Florian and Amin involved, because they really joined from the perspective of being makers. So when Amin made his own version, his own adaptation of Deborah Hayes' score in
the 3D
and that 3D visualization, this was sort of, for me, a kind of pinnacle, because he spent hours of analog time, crafting this, maybe a bit of procedural animation, but, it was pretty much handwork, which was kind of nice, and really, they got very deep into that work. And I think the CCL then was always intended, a little bit like having the talk from Philip, as an opportunity for coders who are interested in movement to get access to the idea of choreographic thinking, or that there's more to just movement if you engage with a maker, a movement creator, somebody who's been trained, somebody who's a vocabulary, who got more invested in the details and the nuances and, the feelings and the emotions and the intuitions in the context of art making. And that's so the CCLs were really that motivated to try to do that kind of thing. Yeah, they've been really great. You participated in a number of them.
Yeah, I joined the first time like 10 years ago.
Yeah, and you took Deborah Hayes' data, and then you were like, well, we've got pathways, and let's see how we can transpose this to a sort of a different context. And
yeah, I really appreciate the input from the first day during that CCL, because otherwise I wouldn't have thought about like creating with particles, like analog, and also that was not just about visualizing the movement, but what what does it mean as a material, because I was like relating this to cells and
Yeah.
something that I really wanted to make something not just like pretty visuals, but something that talks
Yeah.
in a way like to reveal the choreography. I don't know. Yeah.
No, I
it's
think
like-
you've always, that's my sense of your involvement in these, and it has been that, and just in talking to you generally, that component has been really interesting and inspiring to interact with dance makers and movers and people who bring that kind of knowledge. And sometimes that, I remember, I have an anecdote. One of my favorite moments at the CCL was in Los Angeles, and we had a couple of Roz Warby was there, and
that was 2015.
yeah, that was 15. That's
Right
when
after New
Quinn.
York.
That's when Quinn did the trackable qualities, and I don't remember his name, but he was a coder, and he came in with some ideas. But as often happens, people come in with starting points and they divert and go someplace else and find themselves, which I think is one of the wonderful sort of features of this these days. Oh goodness, who is the? Oh goodness, I'm going to forget her name. She was from the Trisha Brown Company, and she and Roz both talked about their work. I think she gave a warm up, and I found this coder, this kind of just an anecdote really, that he was sitting, wasn't anywhere near his computer. He was sitting with a notebook, and not in a corner. I wouldn't say in a corner. He sort of on the side of the space, and I said, "How's it going?" He said, "I can't continue with what I thought I wanted to work on because my mind's blown." Something like that. I mean, I'm absolutely paraphrasing, but something like that, which should happen. I mean, if you suddenly realize, wow, there's so much depth, there's so much, again, details and nuances and thinking and experience and practice going on here, which I think you also resonate with. It just
Totally.
that, there's all this stuff, and it's it's very human, deeply human, and so I'm sure he went back to coding. I don't think we disabled him in any sense, but he just like, not in front of my computer, just a little notepad and pen, trying to kind of work out some ideas.
But I guess like that kind of inspiration led people to, for example, like have this discussion around trackable qualities, which is
Absolutely,
really amazing.
Yeah. No, and I think even increasingly with the techno-determinism and the tendency that things that are going on with AI and on a big scale and social scale, that these collaborations are essential, because I think we need to collaborate. Technology is not going away. There's not, but to find opportunities to work closely with people from other disciplines to build bridges of understanding, I think is increasingly important as we navigate this kind of weird terrain we're in. Not only there are lots of things going on in the world in the moment, but AI is an odd. You can't say it's been around for a long time, but it's been oddly featured in the last couple of years in ways that are disruptive and odd, weird. So I hope. Anyway, I think these kinds of collaborations are really crucial.
I'm really curious, like, where is dance and technology, or like CCL format, motion bank, where is it going? Like you just mentioned about AI, and I think it's inevitable to we have to use it in some ways, but like, do you think like this collaboration format should happen more, or like what can we do to like support or to foster a community against technology?
Well, I think I don't know what will happen with the CSL formats in a way. I think I'm not quite sure. They've gone on for a while. Whether it depends a little bit on Florian and David. What happens literally with the structure itself here. Florian's done a miraculous job getting funding and having a team here, and Anton is here, and David and Anton, Florian are completely committed in many ways. But the CCLs take some time, and I'm not quite sure whether they are a format that anybody could do. They've always been considered open source in the sense that
Right. And I see like other like initiatives
yeah,
happening here and there.
people can do that can follow this format. Um, I don't really know. I mean, I've retired from my university, so I'm in a transition myself personally. I think that for me personally, the interest in further collaboration goes a little bit outside the art field and tries to broaden the scope of understanding what dance research can bring to a problem, to spend more time drawing attention to the embodied knowledge that's intrinsic to dance practice, because and the fact that embodied knowledge is something everybody has, because everybody has a body, but that body is being lost in the move towards this thing which is being which has been named as a sort of form of intelligence. So I'm currently been working a little bit on a critique of things like embodied intelligence, which is a robotics field, like a subtle critique, and I'm asking questions, about the idea that you can know, you can logically kind of understand things that the body experiences, such that you can model them, or you can then build simulations and various kinds of things that robotics have been doing an amazing job at. I mean, that bottom-up intelligence that started with Rodney Brooks makes a lot of sense. So you give them a few sensors, they learn a lot. But I'm afraid I feel that kind of thing has a tendency to shift our focus away from the thing that makes us most human, which in my view is being a body, being born, living for a while, and then dying. And it seems that the dance research has the opportunity to draw more, to keep the attention on that experiential dimension, and ask people to think a little bit about how they refer to machines. Do they refer to machines as having bodies? They do. Do they anthropomorphize machines? They do. But what are the long-term implications of building that kind of relationship with things that are distinct from us? And that's an exercise that I think requires collaboration. So we need to have that as a conversation between computing scientists and engineers, artists, body people. It can be craftspeople, it can be musicians, can be, it doesn't. And I think the task is not to make art together, but the task is to explore imaginaries, like the human imaginary, and tease out the kind of future we wish to have, and think about the tools we're thinking with, really, that kind of thing. So I think dance research can do a lot there, and so my focus is kind of shifting in that direction. And technology is obviously very much a part of that picture, but but I'm kind of shifting outside the arts field per se, and looking to open up dialogue and debate and discussions and practices with other fields. And there are, I think, and I've done some research recently, and I think, and I had the feeling there is a pushback a little bit. There seems to be more research looking at embodiment as a component of lived experience, which is sidelined somewhat